Ooh, okay, I gotta quit making those noises. I've seen my other videos where I'm gasping for air or something like that. You think I'm dying. What do you call this? Another little walk through the library with Old Man Cellar. Show you some of my favorite books here. I'll try to do this high speed. You might be interested in it. Here's one by Ken H. Green, The Village Horse Doctor. This guy has a series of books. There's 6 or 7 books. Short stories, real entertaining. I think it takes place in 1930s or 40s. The guy's a veterinarian, but really funny. Really some good stuff in here. This one here, this is one of my all-time, this is actually a novel. I usually don't read novels. I'm pretty much nonfiction. This is by Gary Paulson, The Woods Runner. This is actually a children's book, like junior high. And that really fit me, go figure. Because it's a little short, the sentences are a little shorter, to the point. The way it was written, it's not as, the detail is there, but I just like the way he wrote it. But this is a great story. Pre-revolution, kid comes home, he's out in the woods hunting some, got his musket, cap and balls, gonna go out there and hunt some deer, comes back home, his family's gone. They've been, Indians and some kind of people came through, took his family. He's having his SHTF, WROL's going on, and now he's gonna go hunt his family down. But it's just a great read, not a very big read. Gary Paulson, The Woods Runner. This guy does some good stuff. Really great book. This was one of my first living outdoors kind of books. Guy Grieve, Call of the Wild, My Escape to Alaska. Well written, interesting, but the guy left his wife and kid and I think a little baby to go find himself out in the wilderness. Not cool. I mean, he should have found he was a dad, stayed back home with his family and did this some other time. And he kind of went through some hardships on this. It was a neat book, but the whole time I'm thinking, dude, you're out here busting your tail in the woods. You might die, and your family's back there wondering just what the hell you're doing. This one kind of pissed me off. Good read this stuff, but just kind of, that whole thing kind of pissed me off. Leviathan. This is, what's his name? Eric J. Dolan. This guy has written all kinds of books. This one is, let me give you the thing. The History of Whaling in America. You'd be surprised at what impact whaling had, at least in Western cultures and stuff. When they used the baleen and the oil and all that stuff, then when actual oil came on, petroleum, it changed all that. But this was really interesting. Now this here, this is a great book. This is very interesting. Scott Zesch, I think his name. The book's called The Captured. This guy wrote the story starts about his great uncle or something like that. I think the guy's name, I'm trying to remember his name here. Adolf Korn. It's a German kid who was basically a homesteader, immigrant, and the Cherokee Indians in the West Texas area and all that came and captured him. And he talks, the whole story is about the kids that were taken captive by the Indians and so on and so forth. You're like, okay, yeah, whatever. But what he points out in this book is how so many of them that were captured by these Indians that survived and lived amongst the Indians, when they went to get these kids back and bring them back, most of them ran back to the Indians. And they couldn't see, they were amazed at how so many of the kids became warriors, white warriors for the Indians, and within a year or two were actually fighting against the white man, killing white people. But really an interesting story, The Capture. It's about Adolf Korn. I'll probably read this again. This is a good one. The Rise of the Fourth Reich, from the conspiracy king himself, Jim Marrs. I love this guy in interviews and stuff. Very entertaining. He was usually big on Art Bell back in the day. This is about the secret societies that threatened to take over America. It's talking about the Fourth Reich. In other words, the Reich has never disappeared. It's going on. Pretty good read. I got about halfway through it, and I got enough conspiracy. And this is probably true. I'm not doubting what the guy said, but I didn't need any more of this, so I can't honestly say how it ends. I didn't finish it. I simply got halfway through it. And these are the things, I get enough of this stuff where it just starts to get me in a real dark place, and I don't need to be in any darker place. Good book. I mean, worth reading if you don't know much about conspiracies and stuff, especially this particular one. you know, the rise of the Fourth Reich. He believes it's coming upon us again. This is probably, I'd put this be as controversial as the Bible itself, I think. This is called The Wolfer by Carter Niemeyer. Okay. This guy was tasked with a job. He was a trapper. And part of the reintroduction of the wolf back into the northern states, back in the U.S., which has gone on for 10, 15 years. Very heated, very debated. I did not have a dog in this race. I am a rancher. I like animals too. I like the wilderness and all this. But I always thought this was just a very interesting topic, the whole wolf thing. Especially from my perspective. I've been preyed upon by these coyotes and stuff, and I can see where these people are coming from. But I also see where the people that want the wolf back, blah, 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 and all that. But this is interesting, because this guy's job was to go and trap the wolves that they were bringing back here. And then he was also the guy who was keeping the numbers. He was the one who had to go out and selectively shoot the wolves that were, you know, going rogue when they were brought back here and all that stuff. Really an interesting book. This guy was hated on both sides. The wolf people hated him. The anti-wolf rancher crowd hated him. This, you know, and I take all these books on face value, just assume what they're saying is the truth. You know, this guy could be the biggest turkey that ever walked, but the book was well written, you know, and I don't know the man or anything like that. Some people say, well, that guy did this and that, whatever, you know. But as far as the book, as far as, you know, taking the information off the page, really interesting. This guy, you know, he really had no group to run to, because both sides were pissed at him, and even the people that he worked with, you know. But pretty interesting book. It's a Carter Niemeyer. I don't know if you see the name in there. Just look up The Wolfer on Amazon. It'll have 10 billion mostly hates on the Amazon reviews. Great book. But boy, this guy caught a lot of heat. Here's a book I read years ago, The Cowboy and the Elephant. This guy here, this was a rancher, typical cowboy rancher, the real deal. And he is actually the original Marlboro Man. His ranch, production outfit rented his ranch to shoot the Marlboro Man photos for the cigarettes, and they kind of figured the guy just seemed a little too light and didn't fit the model didn't fit the mold they were looking for, and so they went to this guy who owned the ranch and said, hey dude, you're it, sit up on there, let's take your picture. And he did it, and he was the first Marlboro Man. Came out years later. You know, he spoke against tobacco years later. But anyhow, he's got this ranch. He rents out space for horses and such, boarding they call it. The guy shows up with this elephant, and ends up turning out to be a, you know, goofball guy. He splits, leaves this guy with his baby elephant. He grows up big. I believe it's an African elephant. Yeah, African elephant. Huge. I don't know if you've ever been to the zoo and you see the little Chinese elephants. They're kind of cute and, you know, pudgy, fat things. Then you go and you see an African elephant, and they just kind of, you don't want to get too close to the fence. That's what this was. But yeah, it's about his experience raising this elephant and their time together. It was real. At this, it's not a tear-jerky kind of book, but you'll cry all through this thing. Great book, The Cowboy and the Elephant. Okay. This, Kent Nerburn is his name. He writes a lot about the Native American, and he's a good writer. He's another guy. He's another guy who gets a lot of mixed reviews. This particular book here, it's Chief Joseph and the Flight of the Nez Perce. Great book. This was good. I not so much whether this is just a really good book. I've read a lot of stuff about the Native Americans. This one I think was the most important as far as it explained to me the structure. As far as how the chief, the hierarchy and everything worked. But really, they really got screwed. Just like, I mean, like the rest of them. But anyhow, this is the Chief Joseph. Everyone thinks, oh, this guy was the big chief of the Nez Perce. No, he was a camp chief. It was a very important position. He was born into it. His brother was a warrior chief, but this guy was a camp chief, and so it was his position to keep things moving smoothly inside the camp. He was very well respected in that case. Whereas when they were all ended up fleeing and were chased down by the cavalry and stuff, he had to stay behind with the people when the wars and stuff left to continue fighting, trying to get to Canada. and so it became Chief Joseph's War, when he was just the last guy on the scene because he's the one that had to take care of the camp. Very interesting take on this one. Really enjoyed this book. Chief Joseph, The Flight of the Nez Perce. Nurburn's the guy's name. Pretty good writer. A lot of controversy with that one. I haven't read this. Farley Mowat. I got a bunch of his stuff. I read some of it. I don't know. Years later, I'm thinking maybe some of the stuff he did wasn't necessarily true. It was just a nice little story, you know, made out to be true. But I don't know. You know, good stuff. Didn't read it. Okay, Trackers: The Untold Story of the Australian Dogs of War. This is an Australian guy who fought in Vietnam, and Vietnam was assisted in the whole Vietnam war over there. But they also brought the dogs. They had tracking dogs. Really a good book. Pretty interesting. How they used the dogs. We had them as well. These guys had labs. I think we used German Shepherds. But there are 2 or 3 different countries that brought dogs into the game as far as tracking, finding bombs, that kind of stuff. But real interesting. This is a good one. I learned all kinds of stuff in this one. Hampton Sides, Blood and Thunder. This was, it says, the epic story of Kit Carson and the conquest of the American West. Hampton Sides, really good author. This is like, you know, current view of history. They kind of let some things out that you didn't know of. Most people don't realize, and I've got several books that go to this. Most people don't realize when you think of the slave trade, slavery, you think of the you know, black African Americans in the South. Most people don't know about the slavery that was going on in New Mexico, Arizona, California was the worst, absolute worst. And we're not talking blacks here. We're talking Indians on Mexicans and Mexicans on Indians, whites against them all. You know, Kit Carson had a couple of kids that he raised. They were Mexican kids, Mexican or Indians, that he bought at the slave market, but then raised them as his own children. You know, you go buy kids. You know, just goes back to that Adolf corn story. They would sell and trade children. Very common. You know, in the West, it was. I had another book I'd have to find where people think as the white man's coming out west, the Indians are getting all pissed off and, you know, fighting and all this kind of stuff. When there was several quotes by big Indians, I think the Sioux and someone else, that say, hey, we've seen what the white man's done out in California. This is before it was called California, but we've seen what the white man's done out west. We know what you guys are all about. It just, you know, California thinks they're all so, you know, sweet and clean and, you know, all this kind of stuff. We have all kinds of bad past here. This is an important book if you're SHTF, WRL, and all that. The Worst Hard Time. This is a current book. Timothy Egan, well written. It's about the Dust Bowl. I learned all kinds of horrors about this thing. I didn't know it took so long. I knew what started it, you know, the poor farming practices, but this was devastating. This was at the worst possible time. The terrible economy, post Depression, in the middle of the Depression era, and then this thing happens, and this was pretty wicked. This is a good read. This would be a good prepper read. That was the Worst Hard Time. This is pretty good. One Ranger, about a Texas Ranger. Guy's name's Jackson. Just a bunch of short stories about his situation being a Texas Ranger. Good book though. This, let's see, The King of California. Okay, this is by Mark Arax. This is about, I gotta remember his name, J.G. Boswell and the Making of a Secret Empire. This is about the cotton industry in California and the Tulare Lake Basin. How would you put this? Kind of the corporate angle. Kind of, you know, when you're big, you don't have to vote. You don't have to worry about that kind of stuff because you know both sides of the equation. This is a pretty interesting book, The King of California. I'd read this. This is about water. It's about power. It's about manipulating the government the way you want it. You know, that kind of thing. But really, it was an interesting book. My family knows the guy that wrote this. Makes me a big deal. The Cowboy Way. This is a three-piece suit kind of guy that went out and got up on a cattle ranch. Worked there for a while. Not bad. Let's see here. David McCumber. You know, that was worth a read. Now this This is the second book I read on this. I don't know if this is the first one or the second one. This is The Man Who Didn't Fit In. There's actually another book. The first book that came out, I think, was called, but the same guy. The guy's name is Dick North that wrote these. The Man Who Didn't Fit In. The original book, let me see if it's on the back. The Mad Trapper of Rat River. This was actually the longest manhunt in North American history. This happened in Canada. But very interesting. I basically shot a couple of Mounties and heading for the trapper. Trapping the Boundary Waters. This is a pretty good book. This is basically about 30s and 40s, I think. Guys trapping northeast. Good book. This one here, the Sly Tiger. We were talking about this. The Saga of Hugh Glass. This is the guy. There was a movie made by him. I think it was called the Man of the Wilderness. Guy got attacked by it was a bunch of trappers, got attacked by the grizzlies. They left him for dead. It's based on a true story, and it's about Hugh Glass. And this was a pretty interesting book about that one. This here kind of fits with my last video. Journal of a Trapper, Osborne Russell. This is the guy that became governor of California. Here's a good one. Idaho Loners. Hermits, Solitaires, and Individuals by Court Conley. Idaho has the largest, let's just say, recorded number of these people. Hermits, Solitaires, that kind of thing. Due to their laws and such, they don't mess with them. I have friends that live in Idaho, and you can actually go out in the sticks and just hole up. Well, you can't do that in California. You can't do that in other places. But there's and a lot of it because some of the land is just uninhabitable, cold and rocky and all this. But very interesting book, because like I said, the largest number of these hermits and recluses and this kind of thing. It's a pretty good book about the individuals. Here's a really good book. My Lead Dog Was a Lesbian. This is back before I got to prepping. My Lead Dog Was a Lesbian. This is Brian Patrick O'Donohue. He's a journalist, and he put together a team and got the Iditarod. A very entertaining book, really interesting. My Lead Dog Was a Lesbian. Here's one. I got several books on this. I'm going to do one book like this that I'm going to do a video all by itself. Very interesting. This is The Black West by William Loren Katz. And it's a documentary and pictorial history of the African American role in the western expansion of the United States. Blacks, Mexicans, Indians. There's a lot of stuff we haven't been told. And people say, well, this is just an opinion piece. This guy's just telling what he thinks is. No, you have to understand, in these times, in the 1800s, late 1700s and all that, when the printing press came about, we love talking about stuff in the print. This other book I'm going to do, it's called I'll tell you what it is. It's called The Negro Cowboys. And these guys found most of their information from the newsprint. Okay? But when you look back on history of these times, you read all these stories, you don't hear much about the blacks, the Mexicans, and this kind of thing in a lot of the history, especially in the cowboy stuff and western expansion. But they were there in the newspaper stories. These people were there. They're on the scene. So this is one of those books that kind of points out a few things that you don't. A lot of people don't realize. I think it was the largest hotel in the West, which at the time I think was in Cheyenne, was owned by a black man. A lot of stories like that in this book, and this other one I'll do a video on. But this kind of history I like. Just these guys were basically going through all the old newsprint saying, wow, talk about a lot of black folks in here. We didn't know they were in there. Because our history just didn't tell us that. They kind of, white it out. But anyway, pretty good book. I'm going to do another one on that. This is the last one. I'll let you guys go. This is George Bird Grinnell, Two Great Scouts and their Pawnee Battalion. This was actually pretty interesting as far as how we use Indians against Indians, or, one captured group against another captured group. I think we might see some of this in the future. Take the people from this town and go, mess with the people from that town, that kind of thing. But that's what this was like. They used these Indians to go find other Indians and work them over. But anyhow, I hope that was entertaining. Got some pretty good books there. something you might check out. Most of these you can get for cheap on Amazon. None of them are all that overpricey, but anyhow, check them out.